Today we're talking about electric netting fence for goats, different types and their uses, when it works, when it doesn't, and how to use it effectively. I'll be giving tips for success and things to be aware of when using electric netting. This episode is packed full of tips I've learned from 6 years of experience and some failures with electric netting. Let's go! Hey friends, welcome to the Get Goat-Wise podcast. Are you longing to raise goats and other animals for food but don't know where to start? Do you want to be more self-sufficient and less dependent on the grocery store? Do you wish you had a mentor to walk you through raising livestock? Hi, I'm Millie, animal scientist, cattle girl turned goat rancher, co-owner of Dry Creek Livestock, and simple living enthusiast. For 15 years, I've been on a mission to raise all of our own meat, eggs, and dairy. Here, we'll talk about raising goats and other homestead livestock, how to create sustainable animal management systems that actually work, and a bit of off-grid life with kids and livestock. If you're ready to take control of your food supply, raise livestock with confidence, and provide your family with the most nourishing meat, eggs, and dairy available, you're in the right place. Kick off your muck boots, pour a cup of coffee, and let's talk livestock. Before we get started on today's topic, I want to read a review titled, Encouragement for Families New to Homesteading. Chris Pierce writes, I live in a suburban area, so while we don't have animals for now, we do keep expanding our gardens, making more food from scratch, and keep learning new skills. And Millie, through this podcast, shares honest, helpful, and encouraging information about homesteading, raising animals, and more. I learn a ton every episode. Thanks, Chris. If you'd like to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, scroll down to Ratings and Reviews, click on the purple words, Write a Review, then give me stars and tell me what you think. I'd love to hear from you, and you might just hear me share your review on the podcast. Goats can be challenging to fence in. They're hard on traditional fences and seem to be able to get under, through, or over almost any fence. I was told by another goat owner that if your fences can't hold water, they can't hold goats. It sure feels like that's true sometimes. We've been raising goats for 7 years now, and I'm lucky to be married to a fantastic fencer, an all-around great guy. So we've tried a lot of things, some that worked really well and some that didn't. Today I'm going to focus on electric fence, specifically netting, what works and what doesn't, and some tips for success. I'll save wire fences and hot wires for another episode. Why did we choose to use electric netting? When we first got goats, we weren't sure how to fence them, and we didn't want to guess and invest in a bunch of expensive permanent fencing and risk it not working out and needing replaced. We also wanted the ability to set up temporary grazing areas, particularly to graze for hire, for weed control, and fire breaks. But one of our biggest factors for using it was predators. If you have neighbors, you'll quickly find out that dogs are one of the biggest risks to your goats. Electric netting is amazing at deterring predators, and once a dog gets a jolt from that fence, they tend to not come back around. The first type of netting we bought was temporary netting from Premier One Supply. That was 6 years ago. It's 42 inches tall with solid vertical struts, which help it keep its shape and not sag. We used it year-round while we lived in town. We went with solar energizers, knowing that we would likely be moving off-grid someday, and we wanted to figure out how to do it effectively without power. The temporary netting is meant for short-term use and to be easier to move. This is the stuff we now use daily in the spring, summer, and fall to rotational graze or focus grazing on a specific area, like irrigation ditches or weeds. It will stay in one place from 1 day to a couple of weeks, depending on the location and amount of feed. We don't use it year-round now, but it worked well when we did. Semi-permanent is a taller fence that is meant to stay in the same place for months or years. Ours is 48 inches tall, and we use it for night traps and winter pens. We have one pen that has been in the same place for over 3 years, and it functions great as long as the energizer's working. It'll even hold bucks, which is pretty amazing. We are using an 8-joule energizer on that pen, so it's really hot, and the goats only touch it once, and that's enough to make them think it's not a good idea. Here's the specifics on what we use as well as some other options. Netting from Premier One Supplies comes in 100-foot lengths. We have 8 sections of semi-permanent and more than 20 sections of temporary. I'm not even sure how many we have now, but it's a lot. The oldest fence has been in use for 6 years. A lot of that was year-round, and we're still using it, so the longevity has been impressive. Positive-negative. All of our fence is positive-negative. It's ideal for dry, sandy, or rocky areas where there's not enough moisture to properly ground the fence. The wires alternate between hot and ground. The reason for this is when an animal touches a hot wire, but there is not a good path to ground where the goat is standing, it won't get a shock. But with positive-negative fence, as soon as it touches the next wire above or below a hot wire, that wire will provide the necessary ground to deliver the shock. The connections for this type of fence are a little different too. Your hot connection goes to the top wire, your ground connection goes to a ground rod driven deep enough to get to moisture, and a connector goes from the ground rod to the second wire, which is the alternating ground wires. Drivable posts. All of our temporary fence has drivable posts. It's built to handle being pounded in with a dead blow hammer or mallet. If the semi-permanent had the option of drivable posts, we would definitely have that, but it doesn't. So my husband set up a drill that will drill the perfect size hole for the spike, and then we can gently tap the post in. The fence can also be purchased with step-in posts for areas with softer ground. Single spike versus double spike. All of our fence is single spike. The double spike is for soft ground that needs a little more support from the double spike. Most of our energizers are also from Premier One. There's a link to their netting and energizers in the show notes. We have a few energizers from Gallagher. Most of those are used on hot wires. They have a really great design for seating on T-posts or hanging on wood posts. All of our energizers are solar, off-grid friendly. The other benefit is that they are very flexible for location. You don't have to be near a power source. If you do have access to power, you can get a lot higher powered energizer for a lower cost versus solar. I've linked a YouTube video in the show notes done by our friends from Backyard Green Films. They came out here last summer to do some video work on our place, and they got some great footage of our electric and how we do it. If you need a visual on what I'm talking about, go check it out and show Rick and Alara some love. They're really great people doing amazing work. All right, here are some tips for success. Make sure the netting is tight and not sagging. After you drive the first post, use your foot to pull the bottom of the next post tight before you push or drive it in. Do that on every post, and you'll end up with a tight fence. Put a support post between two sections of fence to keep the end posts of the two sections from touching, so your electricity isn't jumping between wires that are too close to each other. The fence comes with tie strings that look like shoelaces. Attach it to one of the end posts about a third of the way down, then weave it around the support post and the other end post and tie it up. That will keep those posts from slipping around and accidentally touching wires. Corners tend to pull in and sag, but you can remedy this in a few ways. Drive your corner posts at an angle away from the direction of pull, and that will offset the pull. If your corner is where two sections meet, drive your support post at an angle with the top tipping away from the direction of pull, and when you tie your two sections of fence to the support post, it will tighten things up. If you still have some sagging or loose fence, use an extra support post outside of the fence. Again, drive it at an angle with the top leaning away from the fence, and then tie your fence to that post, pulling it upright and tight. If you are putting up semi-permanent, go ahead and invest in support posts to put between the posts that are built into the fence. This gives a lot of extra strength to your fence, especially when it's going to be in one place for quite a while. You'll want the extra support to prevent sagging over time. Don't overload your energizer. When you are shopping for your energizer, keep in mind how many sections of fence it can effectively energize, and don't go over that number. If you are putting up more sections than your energizer can handle, attach another energizer to some of the sections and stay at or below the fence load that both energizers are rated for. Grass load. Heavy grass load will ground out your fence or at least lower the strength of the shock. What I mean by grass load is when grass is touching the fence, especially wet, heavy grass. We use a few different ways to deal with this. On our upper ground, we can basically part the grass with a foot while laying the fence in the groove. You kind of step on it while you're making the part, and it lays pretty good. In the meadow where the grass is thick and tall, we've used lots of things from a weed eater, brush mower, and even a four-wheeler to make a path with the tires and lay down the grass and then put the fence in that groove. After some really bad marathon fencing sessions, I've decided that it's best to have enough fence that if you end up needing to cross a hard-to-fence area, just add in an extra section or two and go around the bad spot. Keep it out of the water. If the fence becomes submerged, even part of it, it will ground out and not be effective. We had fence set up along the river, and some flash flood level storms hit and raised the water level rapidly. We hurried and got the goats moved, but by morning, part of the fence was underwater and the whole fence was completely ineffective. So be aware of water and keep your fence up where it's dry. Ground rod. The fence has to have a good ground to be effective. Some of the energizers from Premier One come with a base that drives into the ground and the energizer sits on it, and that is where you clip the ground wire. Those are only about 8 inches long, so if you are working on dry ground, that probably won't work very well. You can always drive a longer ground post and clip to that. When it's really dry, we will pour water by the ground rod to help create a better path to ground. If your ground is dry, sandy, or rocky, you'll want to consider getting positive-negative fence to counter the problems that come with that. Test the fence regularly. Make sure you check the fence regularly so you can find problems before they really become a problem, like goats stuck in a fence that is not energized. Have extra leads and power links available. We've had prairie dogs chew through leads more than once, so you want to be able to fix that as soon as you find it. Set up a toolbox specifically for electric fence. Each section of netting comes with a repair kit, so put those in there. Have a tester or two, extra leads and links, dead blow hammers or mallets. Our favorite mallet is a $6 mallet from Harbor Freight, linked in the show notes. A regular hammer to drive ground rods, extra tie string, and a tool to cut poly wire when you need to make repairs. Leapfrog the fence. When planning your fence, set it up so that your next pasture will use at least one section of the current fence you're in. You'll spend less time setting up fence, and moving the goats will be a breeze. Always have fence energized. Any fence that is up needs to be energized, even if there are no goats in it. Unenergized fence is dangerous for livestock and wildlife that could get tangled in it. One of the 2 deaths we've had because of electric netting was a doe that got caught in a section of fence that was laid down but not picked up yet. Hard lesson learned. When rotational grazing, don't push them too hard grazing in one place, or they will start pressuring the fence, looking for a place to escape. Too much pressure, and your fence will get damaged and or fail. Remember, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Basically, don't leave them in one place so long that the grass on the other side of the fence is too tempting. Here are some benefits of electric. Focused grazing. With electric netting, you can dial in exactly what you want them to graze heavily, particularly weeds and other undesirable species. Intensive rotational grazing. Electric netting gives you control over what they have access to and the timing. You can graze an area quickly, concentrating their fertilizer and avoiding regrazing, especially during rapid plant growth. We've seen some amazing land improvements in a few short years utilizing this method. It'll take a long time to know the effects for sure, but I'm confident we're heading toward our goal of soil building. Mobility. There's not another fencing option that I'm aware of that is as mobile and effective as electric netting. Cost. When compared to goat-proof permanent fencing, it's so much cheaper, and combined with the mobility, that will outweigh a lot of the downsides to netting when it's decision time. Combination of netting and permanent fence. Netting is a great temporary solution while you work toward permanent fence. And once that permanent fence is in place, the netting is still useful for focused, intensive grazing, weed control, and grazing for hire. Predators. When I first started looking into electric netting, I read somewhere that it was originally designed to keep bears out of beehives. That's impressive. I figured if it can deter a bear, the free-ranging town dogs shouldn't be a problem. And they weren't. My husband has watched coyotes approach the fence, get a shock, and then they won't touch it again. They'll get close and yap and drive the guard dog crazy, but they haven't successfully gotten through the fence up to this point. Here are some drawbacks and challenges with electric. The biggest one being energizer failure. When that happens, you basically have a huge net for the goats to get tangled in. Sometimes the batteries need to be replaced, and sometimes there's not enough sunlight for the solar to charge enough to run during the night. The leads can get knocked off or chewed through, and that renders the fence ineffective. This goes back to checking the fence regularly, so even when things are looking good, you need to go put a tester on it. Super friendly goats with no respect for boundaries or space are more likely to crawl through electric netting just to get next to you. I mentioned this in the Bottle Baby episode. Some goats figure out how to get under it. The bottom wire sets on the ground and isn't energized. Every once in a while, you'll get a goat that will find a little low spot where that bottom wire isn't touching the ground, and they'll figure out how to get their nose under it and shimmy out underneath. If this happens, you have to deal with it, or the escapist will teach the whole herd how to get out. You can try a more powerful energizer and see if that deters the escaping, or the goat will have to be penned somewhere else behind solid fence. We've only ever had that happen once, but we didn't catch on to what was happening fast enough, and she taught 3 others how to get out before we saw what they were doing. All 4 went to new homes, and we've not had a problem since. Occasionally, a goat will jump the 42-inch temporary net. We don't keep goats that jump fences because they teach other goats to do the same. If they'll jump netting, they'll jump wire fence. So it's just best to not keep the athletic ones unless you're willing to build very tall fences. We had one goat that was a jumper. She was a little Nigerian dwarf, but she could clear a 42-inch fence, no problem. Here's a bonus tip if you have a jumper that you love too much to sell. We put a collar on her, which is not normal for us. There's too much risk of getting hung. You'll only see collars on our dairy does that are currently being milked. So we put the collar on, then we hung a few feet of lightweight chain from her collar. It wasn't heavy, but it drug on the ground and she knew it was attached to her, so she stopped jumping out. I don't know if that'll work on any goat, but it worked on her. Time. It's a lot of work to move electric fence every day, especially when you get enough goats that it has to be done every single day. If you can stay ahead of it and have your next pasture set up to move, it gives you flexibility for life to happen. But if you aren't all set up for the next move, life will happen and delay your move. And then the goats are shorted on feed, they're going to pressure the fence, and you've grazed a little heavier than you wanted to. It's stressful and it snowballs. Know that if you're on a daily move schedule especially, you need to stay ahead of the goats by at least one pasture setup. Brush. This is just too darn hard. It gets tangled all the time while you're trying to set it up. You could clear a path with a brush mower, but for us, it's not worth it to spend hours fencing in a brushy area that will only last the goats a day. It's doable for sure, and we've done it, but it's frustrating. Make sure you're feeling extra patient that day. We will be trying some different things to fence our sagebrush ground because there's a huge benefit that you can see in the areas we've grazed with goats. I'll give an update when we find a solution for that. Frost. Our frost-free season is too short here to rely on electric for fall grazing. It's only 52 days. Once it's freezing every night, posts are frozen in, and moving the fence is either impossible or you risk ruining your fence getting the posts out. The winter before last was record-breaking in our area. We had a bunch of fence set up in our meadow with 2 energizers that we planned to graze for 2 weeks in early November. We knew we were pushing the limit, but things were going well, so we set it up. We got 1 day of grazing, and then winter set in. All of that fence and the energizers were buried under 4 feet of snow, and we couldn't get to it. It was late May or early June before the snow melted, but then it was all under water. We finally got it out while wading through a couple feet of water before the river came up higher. Both energizers were full of water, but the fence held up through all of that. Our solution is to build a solid perimeter fence and plan on being done with electric before it freezes hard. This is the first year we'll be testing this out, but I'm confident it's going to extend our grazing season and cut our hay feeding significantly. I hope I've given you some helpful information and tips from our hard-earned experience with electric netting. Now you're better equipped to make an informed decision about electric netting. I've linked a bunch of products in the show notes, as well as the YouTube video that'll give you a look at how we utilize electric netting here at Dry Creek Livestock. And if you'd like to see more of the goats doing roadside weed control with electric netting, there are a few reels on our Instagram. Hey there, thanks for listening today. I'm so glad you're here. If this episode helped you or encouraged you in some way, share the link with your homesteading friends. And if you really want to help me out, click on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. You can connect with me on Instagram or email linked in the show notes, and meet me back here soon for more Get Goat Wise.